So for those of you that don't know me, I'm Veronica Kieran. I have been an entrepreneur since 2010 when I got a crazy idea to create a nonprofit organization in the state of Michigan, where I lived at the time. From there, we did some work that was really good around the United States in the disaster relief field, but I had the privilege of getting laid off during the recession, like so many of us did, and that was my opportunity in order to start a for-profit organization called Green Cup Digital, which still exists today. I sold it in 2018 and spent the past few years consulting. I am also an anthropologist. I have a published study called Stories of Elders, and I, in particular, study paradigm shifts, which is very important when it comes to the DAO, what I am going to explain here today. And I bring all of these experiences together, both in tech and as an anthropologist, to women's non-reproductive health. So that's a little bit about me and why I am, what my background is. Why I am doing this is because I am the target market, and I think many of us in the room are. We've been experiencing a system that doesn't exactly help when we really need it. And so I think that it can get better rather than to just sit and be angry and let it eat me up. I like to try to take action. And so Asterisk was born. So our agenda is as follows. We're going to take a quick spin through what Asterisk is. I will certainly explain some of the lingo that you're going to hear first as well, because we are talking about a new technology or a new-ish technology that some folks may not be totally knowledgeable about. I will describe our planned initiatives thus far, as well as how to get involved, which is a very important point. We'll go into Q&A then. I want to hear from you. I want to hear what's piquing your interest. How can I clarify further? Have I considered X, Y, or Z? So definitely throw your questions at me. From there, we will hear special remarks from our incredible guest, Katie Kirsch, who I will introduce at that point. And then finally, we'll go into discussion. I do not believe in solo leadership, and I do not believe that changing women's health around the world should be done by one person. So the discussion, in my opinion, is part of the most important piece today. And I, again, definitely really want to hear from y'all. And that's my New Orleans accent coming out. So to then move into introducing Asterisk. First of all, what is Web3? So just giving folks here a quick crash course on some of the lingo we'll use. Web 1 is the very early internet. Some of us may be too young to remember, but Web 1 was really the read-write web. It was being able to publish text to the web and able to read text on the web. And that was pretty much it. We saw that through the late 90s, and then we entered Web 2. So Web 2 was where the web started getting extremely interactive. E-commerce in particular was a major advent when Amazon came out in the early aughts. That's when we were starting to enter Web 2. Social media as well is a very familiar Web 2 feature. The problem, quote unquote, just because there are really amazing things that happen in Web 2, but the problem or the issue with Web 2 is that it is centralized. As we have heard many times, if it is free, you are the product. And depending on how far down the rabbit hole and data usage you want to go, it can be quite scary. But there are great benefits, and we've had a lot of incredible things come from Web 2. So definitely not here to slam it, just here to educate. So then what is Web 3? Web 3 is what we're going into now. It started in 2009 with the development of blockchain and the advent of Bitcoin. Okay, so Bitcoin was the first kind of, what is this new thing that for a while people weren't really sure about. The reason that Web3 is so different is because it uses a consensus model of computers all around the world. And I'm talking thousands and thousands of computers all around the world, determining what is and is not owned and what has been published and what is correct and what is not. What that means is that the Web3 is a personal web. It is no longer centralized. It is no longer owned by just Facebook or just Amazon or just Google. Now, when you publish something to the web, if you are doing it through a Web3 application, it is yours. And if you go someplace else, if you leave whatever application, that information goes with you because it has been signed by you when it was published. So this is very exciting, and it's also very important in order to understand what a DAO is. So a DAO stands for Decentralized Autonomous Organization, as you can see there. So decentralized meaning no one person owns it. Right. So we're not talking about a corporation where I'm the president. No, 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 no. Especially if we're going to shift the paradigm for women's health. One woman cannot be in charge. And because of the blockchain, again, so many people can be involved because of tokens. If you own an Asterisk token, right, then you own a stake in the DAO as well as voting rights within the DAO. Whereas when we used to have organizations or corporations where you can only have a few people because there can only be so many signatories and they can only be within a certain area of governance because of laws and regulations that keep everything so tight and cloistered, now owners can be all around the world and can vote, can have a say in what happens. It's autonomous, meaning, again, the computers around the world are building consensus. So we know exactly who owns a stake within the DAO, who owns one of those tokens. And if everyone were to leave the DAO, it would still exist because all of those computers have that information. And finally, it is an organization owned and funded by the people involved. Why this is really exciting is that it gives us the opportunity to create what amounts to a foundation that is owned and run by everyone involved. For the first time, we can have patients voting on the funding that goes into future research for healthcare. We have patients and people who might be using technology vote on where the funding goes into new tech. Okay, so this is a radical paradigm shift for women's non-reproductive health. The vision within the DAO is to see a world develop where women's health is well understood and impartially supported, not product directed, not initiative directed, but voted on with equity from women around the world in order to develop better understanding and better opportunities for us to really, truly thrive. But right now, as it stands, women's health is poorly researched and poorly funded. And we can see it in the numbers. This is just a smattering of the staggering statistics that I am finding every day. My mind boggles as I continue to do research into this space. And right when I think I've heard it all, I discover yet another enormous disparity. 20% of women are saying that their practitioners are dismissing their symptoms. 74% of sex-specific research is going towards male-specific diseases, and only 2% of FemTech or MedTech funding is going towards FemTech startups, startups focused on women's health conditions. And again, this is a smattering, just a tiny little sliver. For example, over the weekend, I learned that there have been incredible disparities with regards to animal testing, female animals not being involved in initial research, all the way up until 2020, when finally some mandates started coming through. So again, I cannot understate the enormous need that we are facing. So what a solution might look like. There are incredible opportunities. I am excited to explore them with you here today, as well as continue to explore them with new members. However, the three major verticals that I see as I've been developing the DAO on my own, as well as researching how other DAOs, how other organizations of this type have been functioning, I've been able to identify reproductive research, non-reproductive research, FemTech startups, and then collectivizing IP. And let's get into that a little bit further so that I can help you understand. So first of all, lowering the barrier to entry to non-reproductive health funding. For example, when a practitioner or researcher wants to apply for funding, they must complete a grant, and that grant goes to a government entity or an NGO, or maybe up through channels within a university. And that often can take around a year in order to receive funding, and even just to start the research, right? However, within a DAO, because we have the ability to reach consensus across the world and vote together using the blockchain, we can receive grants and release funding within as short of a month of time. This is what we've been seeing, how fast we've been seeing other DAOs react and release funding. So this is an incredible paradigm shift just alone. The fact that we can start to release funding faster and funneling it towards this enormous need is absolutely incredible. What excites me is that it doesn't stop there. The paradigm shift continues when we start getting into IP NFTs. Now, I'm sure that all of us here have heard about NFTs, and we've heard about them with regards to ownership of art. That's been the very pop hype rhetoric that we've been hearing about NFTs. But all an NFT is a special type of token written onto the blockchain that ensures ownership of a single entity. So it cannot be exchanged for something else. It is in itself a single value. And we can do this with research. Whereas it might take 12 to 24 months to receive a patent for research completed for the IP that comes out of research, we can mint the research onto the blockchain in about a tenth of the time. Really, what holds up the research being minted onto the blockchain is simply us as an organization reviewing it for validation, just like maybe a government entity would do. So now researchers don't have to wait that amount of time to patent their research, to own their research for the first time, and then for us to perhaps collectivize that research, which I will explain in just a minute. So what I'm calling stage 2, it may flow from stage 1 to stage 2. These verticals also may exist independently. We're interested in funding FemTech startups. So currently, most FemTech startups are focused on reproductive health, which is a very needed space. It was absolutely an important sphere to function in at the time that FemTech really made its advent. I think it's a well-saturated area now, and I'm happy about that. And I think it's a very great opportunity for us then to begin shifting into non-reproductive health. We can do that again by releasing funding much faster to FemTech startups. And what makes a DAO so interesting is that we can function across borders. So we don't have to leapfrog through jurisdictions in order to be able to fund these startups. If we decide that we want to fund startups both in Singapore and in Mexico, we can do that. And we don't have to worry about jumping through hoops in order to make that happen. So then when I'm calling stage 3, which may be a result of stage 1 and stage 2, or may exist as an independent vertical, is for the first time, we can help researchers and startup founders collaborate together. So we may have researchers who are members of the DAO, but we also may have the IP that we have captured from the research we have funded, and we can help FemTech startups function better and faster and more with more data because we can bring that IP to them rather than them having to jump through hoops into the universities and wait for tech transfer. We also can snowball results. So if we have research that may not result in a product, in my opinion, that's fine, because knowledge for knowledge's sake is incredibly important. And it means that we can start to guide future research. What we discover in our initial projects might help us as an organization clarify where the greatest need is for the next steps. So again, incredible opportunity for a paradigm shift. And I personally am very excited about it. The opportunity is also borne out in the numbers. So Fortune has predicted that when FemTech and women's healthcare will reach a market share of 20 billion by 2030. So the funding is flowing in. It is absolutely possible for us to ride that wave. And we have seen that in the past year borne out, proven within the numbers. Boston Consulting Group found that health investments for women went up by 121% just in 1 year. So I think that's incredible flow. To me, these numbers combined with the disparities creates a really incredible and urgent opportunity for us to capitalize on. So what the current ecosystem looks like for DeSci. So DeSci is decentralized science. It is the term for blockchain startups that exist in the scientific sphere. Currently, there are $40 million under management in the existing DeSci space. So again, we're seeing the numbers of money flow in. But there's only 24 existing DAOs. So even if we were to split that evenly, that means about 1.5 million is managed by each DAO. The numbers are looking really good, except for the fact that, in my opinion, we need more DeSci DAOs. We need more decentralized organizations working in this space in order to accelerate funding, research, and access in order to make science and the world a better place. We have two major steps that we must take in order to get off the ground. Okay? So the first is our governance model. You may have heard me allude to the international need. In my opinion, a white woman in Central Europe cannot make the decisions for all women around the world. We need in our governance structure to state definitively that we must have activity and ambassadors around the world so that we can best understand where the action must take place. Determining our consensus model. So how are we going to manage voting? Is it one token, one vote? Is it going to be something else? There are a lot of different formulas for this. And to me, determining which one we use is important so that if we get a large chunk investment, the DAO cannot be taken over by that organization. And of course, then what is our basic structure? How are the members functioning? Is it going to be a core number of members that are taking action on a day-to-day basis with the rest of the members coming in on a perhaps monthly or quarterly vote? Do we want something different? So these are all open questions with regards to our governance, and they need to be answered, but they need to be answered not just by me, which brings us to our initiatives. So first initiative is core contributors. I'm hoping we find some today here. People who feel passionate about this space, who want to take action now in order to help develop the direction of this organization from the get-go. And then honing the organization's focus. What verticals are we going to go after first? And how are we going to organize them in a symbiotic way, in the way that I framed out the stages just a moment ago. That is my prediction. It does not have to be the way that it functions, but we need contributors to help with that. To that end, the current core contributor is me. In my opinion, this cannot stand. And so if you are here today and you know someone who would be enthusiastic about the space and they're not here, I will ask you to please send them our way. I also will ask you to please consider completing our membership form on the website, which I will point you to in just a minute. But really, we need people who are in the medical sphere, who have interest in this space and knowledge into this space, so that we have further visibility into the opportunities available to us. Where could we move quickly and have a large splash to start? We certainly need regional directors. I will not stand down on that point personally. We need to have voices around the world, because again, I cannot personally say what the needs are for a Ghanaian woman. I think only a Ghanaian woman should be able to speak for herself. So we need people across the world who are involved in this organization, who can speak to the very specific needs of the regions, so that this is not a global north research-oriented organization, as so many others have been. And we need a community manager, because I need help communicating with everybody. Eventually, I hope we will grow to, thousands of people involved. That is the dream, in my opinion. Just a quick note where we might be able to go. So these are other potential verticals. Tech transfer, in my conversations with folks in the medical sphere, it is a known issue. How slow or how cloistered IP can be to transfer. Could we act in this space? And could we act in this space without creating enemies? I think is very important. A social media ethnography. We could certainly pioneer a first of its kind anthropological study into aggregating what women are saying on social media, because that is where women are turning when they don't feel heard by their doctors. And I think there is valuable information there. That study has not been done. And I think it could really be an incredible opportunity for us, not just for research for us then to mint as IP NFTs, but then also to help share with other FemTech startups who could really use that knowledge. Okay? And then possibly longitudinal studies. Again, women's bodies are cyclical. And so for me, if I have ever started a new medication or a new practice, I need at least 3 months before I know how I am definitively reacting to it. So I think there's an opportunity here as well, but I need people smarter than me to get involved in order to create a consensus around this, in order to take action. So thank you for bearing with me and listening to me drone on for just a minute. I hope you received some of my excitement and have seen some of the opportunities that we really have here. You can go to the website or use the QR code to scan to the website. The membership form is right on the homepage. I do know a couple of you have filled it out. Thank you so much. I encourage you to either share it or consider completing it for yourselves to get involved. Involvement looks like a few hours a week at this stage, having these conversations, developing the governments, developing the initiatives in order to then take action. So we're very early stage. Involvement doesn't mean another full-time job. So I hope you really will consider it. So with that, I would love to take your questions. I want to make sure that I have been clear, as well as share in anything that has come up with you. So you can use the chat if that feels more comfortable to you. Otherwise, feel free to take yourself off mute. And I am absolutely here for it. Luis, yeah, absolutely. Go ahead.
Yeah, hi, and thank you so much for the presentation. It was very insightful. And I was just wondering, as you were speaking, how do you make sure that there is no large company or large research center that takes ownership of the DAO?
Yeah, so this is an awesome question, and it's really important, because the ideal for the DAO is that we have everyone has basically an equal vote and an equal say, or at least as much as possible. But if we have an organization come in and say, we want to give you an endowment, right? Invest in the DAO in some way, that means that they own a significant amount of the tokens now. So how would we address this? There is something called quadratic voting. It's one of the mathematical models for voting, and it basically evens the scales. It says you could own a large amount, but your vote isn't going to take over the entire voice of the DAO, of the organization. It would be a major disservice to the organization, and it ensures that. So we use that mathematical model in the computing of the voting when it happens. So yeah, no hostile takeovers here. Jordan, please.
Yeah, hi. Thanks so much, Veronica. I was just wondering about like what the strategy is and who we're going to target for funding the DAO. Is it the usual sort of actors in women's health funding as sparse as they are, or are we thinking about like a different model, like is it more crowdsourced or private actors, for example?
Yeah, great question. And that is one of the things that we need to explore is how do we want to fund it? Do we want to just go with member funded, right? So members buying in on the tokens. Do we want to go for large endowments from organizations as a typical FemTech startup might? For me personally, again, I am one voice and I cannot be the only voice in this organization. It does not fly. But for me, I feel it's very important for us to have a member-led organization. But we also need to be able to reach a certain amount of funding in the treasury in order to take the action we want to take. So I'm imagining we will come to a consensus of a blended model. But that's again why I need lots of brilliant minds alongside to help make this decision. Thanks for the thumbs up. Other questions? I know there are questions brewing out there. I know it.
I'll jump. Oh,
sure. Go ahead, Pat.
Yeah. Okay. I was looking for the hand. I couldn't find it.
I believe actually, if you hold your hand up now, Zoom is smart enough to recognize that.
Everyone holds up their hands. No, so I know plenty about DAOs, but I'm not actually like super familiar, on the research cycle, and sort of the stages of that research cycle, right? So it seems to me like within sort of the scientific practice, there is this research probably at a public institution that is then sort of monetized by maybe a large pharmaceutical player or something. But how is that research sort of moving from one stage to the next? And how would a DAO kind of play in there as sort of to capture its own value, or maybe to prevent value from being captured, right, from these large corporate entities? How do you see sort of that dynamic playing out? And please educate me, because I don't understand all these stages fully.
I think that that's a really great question. And there's definitely several different models at play, right? So research done within a university is different than research done within a pharmaceutical company, right? And so how are we going to be able to take action in those spaces? And can we take action in all spaces or just only within private entities? So that's a first question that we need to answer. I think there's also maybe a dual vertical available to us here. The first being, yes, we funded the research and thus we have the capability of minting onto the blockchain. So the IP NFT, we have the opportunity to mint that, and thus the DAO collectively owns it. So we all own that IP and thus can direct it towards further research or towards FemTech startups or other initiatives. I also think it's worth exploring, however, if we can bring IP into the organization that perhaps we didn't fund. But again, that's going to take some further research and further minds that can see into the space in order to make that determination and decide if that's something that we want to do. Louise, you have your hand up. Did I happen to answer your question? No. Okay.
No, I have two questions actually. I have lots of questions. The first one is there already a blockchain ecosystem that you're looking at? So a specific blockchain on which you would like to be built? I know there is Ethereum, there are many others. So yeah, I was wondering about that. And the second one is more personal. Why are you studying this personally as an anthropologist?
Awesome. Also, really good questions. So with regards to which environment we want to be on, which ecosystem we want to be in, we're definitely going to go with Ethereum. However, I am curious about some of the other options. So Ethereum can be a little bit expensive to use. And so there are other opportunities out there, but we haven't actually decided that. Again, it's a little ways down the road, and I don't want to make the final decision on my own. I don't think that that's a healthy thing to do for this type of organization. Why am I getting involved? So I am absolutely the target market. So I have a few chronic conditions that either doctors are telling me I'm crazy, and then the next doctor would tell me, of course, but I don't know why. So, you get yo-yoed back and forth. And that feels very frustrating. I also study paradigm shifts. So as I've been studying Web3 over the past couple of years, it's just really become apparent to me that the opportunity here is enormous. And then the numbers back it up. The way that we've already tried to fund healthcare and to fund research isn't working. We had government entities try to protect women in 1977 and say we can't have reproductive women involved in clinical trials anymore. Period, wholesale, because they were afraid that the fetus would be affected, even if you weren't pregnant. No reproductive age women allowed in research anymore. And then in 1993, they reversed that and said women must be involved in research now. So within my lifetime, we've gone back and forth. The disparity is enormous. The decisions being made are not equitable, and they are certainly from a very specific perspective. And I believe that it's time to build an organization that spans borders so that when we're making these decisions, it's not just white men making the decisions, and it's not just the global north making these decisions. It's true healthcare for all women. I'm very passionate about it. Any other questions about thanks, Jordan. Any other questions about what we might do at Asterisk, the potential verticals that we're exploring, how you might get involved?
I have a question.
Yes.
Veronica,
Hello,
thank you
Connie.
so much. Thank you so much for that excellent presentation. This is so interesting. I've got all kinds of questions that are not mapped out in my head, so God only knows what's going to come out of my mouth. However, okay, this seems amazing. And so one question is around governance and around risk and around insurance. And can you speak to that at all? Is it too early to know about that? Like, what can you tell me about how you are mitigating the risk that all of this takes on, or that we would be taking on as potential directors?
Yeah, that's a great question, actually. So we are a bit early. We haven't developed governance with regards to due diligence, let's say, but there has to be due diligence involved. The general workflow that most DAOs are utilizing is something like an application comes in, right? And then it goes through its first wave of due diligence. Is it even worth voting on in the first place? We, as an organization, need to decide what that due diligence looks like. So then if there are a few people involved to determine if a grant application is even worthwhile, right? Is even compliant for us to take action on. We know what those parameters are, and the core contributors can take action and either dismiss or bring it to a vote. And at that point, we would be able to take the vote. How do we mitigate risk, I think, is also a very important question, and it's still an open question. There are existing models, as we are the 25th DeSci DAO to exist. So there's definitely precedence for us to look at. But we are only the second women's health DAO. The first one, which launched last year, is about reproductive health, which, as we saw, 80% of funding is going there. So we have models to look at and to make a determination, but that determination hasn't been made yet.
Thank you so much. Thank you.
Thank you for that question.
Yes. And so one of my other questions is around, like, let's say Big Pharma got involved in and, you know, put in 1,000 tokens, right? So they've got this enormous voting block. And then they decided that for this formula to equalize things, that they are not given all these votes. And they decide that they want to take their stuff back. So they take their, but is it, am I understanding it correctly that the IP belongs to all of us, or it belongs to that entity?
Yeah, no, it belongs to the organization, and it can't be taken because it has been encoded on the blockchain as belonging to the organization as an NFT that is owned by Asterisk. So if they were to, as you said, come in and they were to give us an injection of, let's say, $1 million, right? And so they bought a block of tokens that confer that value, and then they decide that they don't love the collectivized space and they're getting very frustrated because they can't, as you said, control the way that they're used to controlling. And so they want to leave. What leaving looks like is selling those tokens. So that, just like a typical cryptocurrency, they would sell them onto the blockchain again. I think it's an important question though, because if we were to have such a flood, right, of tokens go back onto the market, it could affect the market share, the value of the organization. And so we may want to include something within our governance that specifies how that can work, just to ensure the security of the organization. So really good questions, actually. And these are, as you see, this is being recorded. These are all things that I'm going to bring forward to hopefully our first core contributors.
Thank you so much.
Yes, we got a question from Vadim.
Yes. Hey, Veronica. Thank you for having me. This is really great. Thank you for the presentation. I just wanted to clarify, if you're focused more on early stage, so the research part of the science, or a little bit later stage. I ask because a lot of the biotechs that I've seen or that I've worked with, there's like a valley of death after after like SBIR grants and before they have clinical proof of concept, and they need to get to IND or they need to get into a phase 1 trial. And that's where I see a lot of companies struggling. So if there's a company out there working in women's health that has some proof of concept through traditional academic grants, but wants to continue that, but is struggling to get traditional funding, is that a good candidate for this project?
I think that's a great question, and I'm really glad that you brought up the Valley of Death because, yeah, it's definitely well known in the research and medical sphere, and it's a really good reminder that as was mentioned before, there are cycles to this, and sometimes those leaps can be hard to make. So, in my opinion, I think it's very interesting to explore that. I have personally no problem with coming into you know, a already developed space and say, okay, how do we help this go further and get to completion and get to publishing? I think that could be a really fantastic added value to the research sphere, because what we're looking at, again, what our initiative truly is how do we further women's non-reproductive health research? And if we find that, you know, within our initial initiative developments, that valley of death is actually one of the more critical spaces, like maybe it's not the original impetus, but it's the valley of death, and so we can have the most effect in that space, then I personally would say, why not do it, right? If the goal is to make as much change as fast as possible. So yes, that will be made note of. And I, again, want to have that conversation with anyone who comes on as a member. I think it's a great opportunity. So we've got, let's go for Rasa for one more question, and then we will kick it off to Katie Kirsch to tell us a little bit more about what she has seen over her past decade within this space. So Rasa, hello.
Hello, thank you for the presentation. Really interesting. So my question is, how do researchers that are very early stage working kind of like as a rogue, I'd like to be more of a rogue scientist, as a health coach. I've worked with a lot of alternative modalities of treatment outside of physicians, because that's what helped me with my chronic conditions, and found them on Reddit and all over the internet, social media. So I'd like to provide more credibility to these types of coaching and healing modalities. But how do we transition from, or how do we add more credibility to this type of research, and support like this rogue, I call it rogue science, that's not like through the traditional avenue of academic grant funding. And so that's something I'm exploring for myself. I'd like to do research on health coaching, methodologies and other healing methodologies that I've experienced outside of conventional medicine. But I also want to establish credibility. Yeah, so my question is, how do we establish credibility with very early stage research on these non-conventional methodologies?
I love this question. I certainly have turned to Reddit myself for help when I had no idea what was going on, and no doctors had no idea what was going on. And that is why I personally, I as an anthropologist, think a ethnographic study into social media, into the voices of women, especially on Reddit in particular, because that is a place where a lot of women turn, and those conversations are trackable. I think that if we were to do that, then we would actually be able to capture some of what you just touched on, that there are opportunities, there are modalities, there are remedies and ideas and things that women are doing in order to cope, right? That doctors are turning away. I mean, we see it very, very often in social media and in community. So to me, if we were to capture that in a ethnographic study, that then starts to validate the existence, right? Because if I say, oh, I found this on Reddit to the doctor, they're going to say, I don't know about that. But if I say this study captured the prevalence of this modality, right? Now we start to have a leg to stand on, and that can then go further into potentially funding research, right? Because now we have cause to, it's the impetus for funding that research in that space. Or also FemTech startups that might be interested in perpetuating some of these modalities. So that's why I'm geeking out, and I completely recognize, like, of course the anthropologist wants to do anthropology, but I do think that it could be a really fantastic early vertical. If it's not one of our first verticals, I think it could be a really interesting early vertical, and then would address exactly what you are curious about. Thank you for the question. Yeah. So now it is my deep, 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 deep honor and pleasure to introduce Catherine Kirsch, Katie Kirsch. I first of all met her, oh gosh, in must have been 2013, 2014. My first company was very new. And I met her at a startup weekend in Michigan. She was going around to everyone saying, hello, I am new in town. What is your name? I'd like to meet you. Her laughter is infectious and her brain is incredible. The second she opens her mouth, if it's not laughter, you're blown away. You're blown away by her laugh too, though. At the onset of her career, Katie co-founded the medical device company called Sisu Global Health, which she was working on when I met her. It targeted emergency surgery cases that lacked access to blood. Her role as chief marketing officer was spearheading marketing campaigns, pricing strategies, financial models, and market sizing in markets that lack significant health data. Sounds familiar. Sisu won an initial grant funding from USAID with no prior experience. The product, Hemofuse, recycled and salvaged a patient's own blood instead of using donor blood in emergency surgery. Her team created a way to decentralize blood supplies in some of the least equipped areas. The entrepreneurial drive to measure, evaluate, and create meaningful systems in healthcare transitioned to better understand how innovations can best serve patients and providers. This led to her value-based healthcare, a shift in thinking for US systems that derives financial support from outcomes, not outputs. Katie believes that measuring this value, organizations, whether device, biotech, or clinical care, can better find their growth, both for impact and finances. And I'm sure we all agree. Welcome, Katie. Thank you so much for being here and for supporting this initiative. You have the stage.
Thanks, Veronica. And also thank you for that lovely opening. It's really funny because I think there's someone here from every part of my career or high school even, which is kind of an odd sense of like, I don't know what version you're going to get of me today. But I want to echo a lot of what Veronica's brought up about the need and bring in another buzzword, God forbid, that most of the medical people will probably like, and that is precision medicine. I think that this space that we're working on in with AsteriskDAO is looking at, similar to other buzzwords we're hearing around AI and facial recognition, it's all about the data sets that you have at the baseline of it. Precision medicine is something that's not well equipped and is not really a reality yet in any modality internationally, but it is something that we're trying to move towards, and having a diverse set of research and information is a really big part of that. And so I really see this ability for us to fund different types of researchers, rogue scientists, my new favorite word, Raza, and other folks who are looking at things that they've understood for maybe a long time, and it feels very anecdotal, but that could have a transition into something more real and credible in a way that is far more interesting. I think one of the most basic things that doesn't get considered is that I think you can go on YouTube right now and go see about 100 million YouTube videos from a guy in a black t-shirt talking about his minimalist lifestyle and how his circadian rhythm operates and how he can optimize that and what that looks like. But when you add having a uterus, you all of a sudden have another layer of a rhythm that happens on a monthly basis that alters your hormones in ways that you just don't always kind of understand, or hasn't really been talked about, of why you're kind of going up and down. I think that just very simple picture is a way to think about, like, we've just added another layer of experimentation on a monthly basis of how we kind of go through our lives. And I think also looking at this, and for me, and again, I'm one voice who wants to be involved with this, starting with highlighting the research is really immensely important. We've been hearing a lot about how FemTech startups are going to be really important. FemTech startups are going to be like a big part of it, but to actually get something to full delivery, there's a much larger ecosystem. We've talked about the boogeyman of big pharma. We've talked about There's also regulatory. There's also these other players, and they all respect, for the most part, universally research as a credibility that needs to be done. And in my own experience, kind of having that dearth of research put on a small startup is probably the hardest piece to get through without some sort of grant funding, without some sort of support that offers some sort of credibility. And I think that process to build a new product kind of requires 4 different aspects. You need to have peer-reviewed research as the first basis. I think Vadim was also highlighting that you get through the SVIRs, you get that validated research. But then you need to also have something that's a sustainable model to actually function with that research, whether that is a financial model, whether that's a more of a nonprofit governmental model that allows some sort of donation-based situation of offering care. But often that still requires something patentable or something that offers some sort of IP that shows this is the item or this is the piece. I don't really see a big difference between an NFT and what the patent office sends out as far as like a piece of paper that we all post on our walls. It's a pretty similar like item at the end of the day. So I really see this as an interesting way to play that. And then the third part is milestone-based funding. Milestone-based funding can be really helpful, and we can play with what a milestone is and what that looks like in the future. But having funding to do those other parts is really important, and having some accountability or accountable structure that you're doing the research that actually supports you along the way and offers you some organization in the research you're doing, because you can go many different directions. And then the fourth part, which I don't think we're saying that we're going to offer, but I would hope is something that we can kind of support, is a team that can drive the first 3. And I think the really exciting part for me is the fact that this DAO structure really allows us to bring in people who are non-traditional people in medicine. I've been trained as a doula, and even though we're focusing on non-reproductive sort of women's health, doulas and caretakers have seen a lot, have dealt with a lot in what it looks like to go through like a women's cycle, post, after giving birth, before, all different points. They're often super marginalized in this conversation. And then also in talking about what Veronica mentioned before about having regional directors and regional players, there's a huge dearth of diversity in research across the board, whether that's racial, financial, all sorts of pieces. And I think giving access to an understanding of research is a really interesting modality that doesn't really exist and is super safeguarded for various reasons. So I'm really excited. I hope that also came through. But I think it's really important that we have a more diverse look at how like women's healthcare in particular has been given, because I think there is a lot of informal research that has been done that is not documented, or is documented but not taken seriously, and that we can really be helpful to really kind of bolster that cornerstone of existing knowledge and actually make it more of a credible system. So I'm excited to be a member, and I hope we'll see some of you there too.
Thank you, Katie. I love, first of all, just your perspective, because again, you've been across the borders. Like, you had a US based company, but you spent so much time in sub-Saharan Africa, specifically in Ghana and Accra, that you very well know that the disparities that can exist across regions, as well as the difficulties that arise when dealing with multiple government entities in order to progress any of this. So it's always exciting to hear you speak about your experience. And I really do say that from the bottom of my heart. Katie and I had a jam session at one point earlier in the process of development of Asterisk, and we were scribbling all over a tablecloth at a restaurant, and it was just really, really fun. So yeah, I see the opportunity. I'm super excited to bring it forth and hope that we can create an ecosystem that we push forward and change this paradigm, because it's so needed. If it's not needed by you, it's needed by a loved one, hands down. So at this point, I would be delighted to open it up to general discussion. This is the chance to play, to get curious, to say what if. Again, we're recording this, so your what ifs could become cornerstones of the organization at some points. No pressure. But just as Rasa brought up, like, how do we start to capture maybe non-conventional or rogue science? How do we start to build the community that's going to be necessary to manage this organization? What are maybe some other verticals we can be exploring? So I would love to hear from you. Just what's coming up? What's striking you? Are you excited? Are you confused? Are you wondering who the heck do I think I am? Just go ahead and pop off mute, or if you feel more comfortable, jump in the chat and share with us.
Tom has a point.
Is his hand raised? Oh no. Tom, are you?
Here I am.
Yay!
I'm not sure where my finger's coming out, but anyway, I just want to comment. I think to what Raza said in the rogue portion, hearing everything and obviously having had the opportunity to talk to you about this before, what struck me about what you're trying to do, on one side is the magnitude, but at the same time, that magnitude is based on the number of women out here in the real world that need this. So I'm sure there are probably several million questions that you can't answer, or nobody here can answer. But what I do want to commend you on is the fact that using the technology that's here today, all right, trying to establish a working mechanism to invite and share your vision with people. Because the need for women's health expands far beyond any one of the countries of any of our participants today. So just more women out here in the real world that need it. And so I'm sure the first questions that have come out are regarding to what's there today in the non-rogue healthcare, pharmaceutical, legality, and everything else. But to Raza's point, I'm sure there's a whole army of persons out here frustrated because of what's there today. That would hopefully, as you're structuring this, give them an opportunity to share their concerns and their experience. So the only thing I can say is to sit in a bleacher and be a cheerleader and help funnel people towards you and your idea. Because this reminds me of a concept many, many, many hundreds of years ago in the United States of an old town hall meeting. And town hall meetings there started out just like that. People pulled up a chair or a little thing to sit on and started sharing the needs that they had when they were in a different place, new country, whatever. And that's how the concept of governance came out. So you've just made a modern technological town hall meeting.
Yeah.
So the more you're opening up, and you have opened up. So I think this is the first step. This is the last step. So this is the kickoff, and saying that this happened and people are interested. And there's a huge need for this. And many of the researchers, and I'm in Brazil, speaking from Brazil, which is a country that has massive health situations, has a government that's doing something, but it's beyond the possibilities of modern day. But there are people, I'm sure, who would like to collaborate and could collaborate. And that's not here in Brazil, throughout. What does attract me is the fact that you're going beyond borders. And the way you're structuring and the governance will come from that. Because if we look inside any border, there are restrictions, there are laws, there's whatever that will probably impede a couple steps forward. So maybe going to another level, another dimension. And then at that dimension, which are structuring, go through all of those questions. I think they're going to be, it needs to be above what exists today. And I'm not saying that there's a solution, but I do see you're offering a pathway. Because many of the people that I know in and outside of, everybody's frustrated.
Yeah.
And more frustrated than the professionals are the women who are not being handled correctly from a health standpoint. That's everywhere. And that's all being highlighted in the wrong way when we look at a global refugee situation, where unfortunately refugees from any country going to any country are pretty much out of any system.
Mm-hmm.
So I think the need is there. It's mammoth. I think you're undertaking, I could just commend you again, and anybody who wants to share their opinions and be part of it. That's it. I could just try to help as much as I can of funneling people to this concept. But to the plus side, somebody else was trying to say there are 20 some entities out there. So you're not the first. So you do have a benchmark. But the need for what you need, it's global. So it's just hopefully each one of the persons participating today can attract another and another and another, and keep building that fire in the town hall meeting, keep it going. So just congratulations to everybody. That's what I could say.
Thank you, Tom. The point about town hall meeting is actually spot on, really. The way that the member meetings will function is exactly that. Because if you're going to be a member, if you don't want to be a steering member, but you want to be a member, right? You still deserve to know exactly what's going on in the organization. And so here's the update, here's what we've got going on, and here's what we want to bring to a vote. So absolutely adept, absolutely adept. I see Jordan with her hand raised. I'm guessing something Tom said sparked your curiosity. Go ahead and show us your pretty face. There you go.
Hi. So I share everyone's enthusiasm with what's being said, and I love that this type of infrastructure is a tangible thing that we can do. So just riffing on this idea of rogue science, I think it's captured everyone's imagination. I want to just bring to the table this idea of feminist science and feminist data, and I think like a lot of it aligns. There's a heap of really interesting guidance out there, and beyond just getting feminist data, which is thinking about different sort of layers of inequality and different angles around gender as well as sex and how the two play out. There's something about feminist principles in building the institutions that do the research and do the data, and I think that's where DAOs are really effective because they sort of embody that, and that's sort of that town hall participatory methodology. But just putting that on the table for thinking about feminist design from the outset. And the second thought I had was around community building, and I'm all for bringing in people who are like dissatisfied with the status quo, but I'm also thinking about how do we bridge with those who are sort of leading the status quo research. So I trained as an obstetrics and gynecology many years ago, and just thinking about how to sort of tap into more traditional hegemonic science, and then on the flip side, thinking about people's needs in a very different country to where I am at the moment, and thinking about how do we sort of ensure that we have like a digital platform that is potentially mobile first, or actually allows people to join when they can and how they can, from with different sort of infrastructure, knowledge and health needs. So something that you mentioned early on, but something that I think should be central in the design. So yeah, over.
Yeah. Thank you, Jordan. And thank you for, spending time with us even while you're traveling. I just really appreciate that vote of confidence that even though you're in the car on the road, you want to hear more. And I think, you're 100% right. So there are traditional structures that we're going to have to be involved with. We don't want to become them. right? And because we are going to be a DAO, that in my opinion ensures that we won't be them, but we also have to reach to them. I'm not a baby with the bathwater type person, so just because it hasn't been working doesn't mean there is no value to be had. And so it's a bridge and it's a starting point. And I think we have a really exciting opportunity to explore what it could be next. And maybe create an invitation for folks to enter this new paradigm as well from traditional medicine. I personally, for me, my dream is that we have patients, researchers, doctors, and other practitioners, all members within this space, all voting together, all dreaming together and determining what the next vertical is, the next area of action is. And I know that that's not happening right now. There's nowhere in the world that's happening. So that would be, to me, very exciting activity. Oh, the heart is sparkly. That's so lovely. Thank you, Jordan. What else is piquing your interest coming up for you? Anything else that you think ought to be known by myself or the others in the group as this kicks off?
I'll chime in. One thing that's kind of been interesting to me is this discussion of rogue science, and I'm especially interested in that because when you're researching just about anything today, I know the first thing that I do is go to YouTube. You know, if I want to learn about a topic, it could be very esoteric philosophy, and there's some guy who's made you know, a slideshow on it, or some professor or something, right? So you know, kind of the centers of knowledge in society are shifting in a sense, or have shifted away from more of an institutional paradigm to more of a decentralized paradigm. And that should make sense, right? You know, more and more people can be involved with science, you know, outside of an academic setting, just by the nature of how many people exist outside of academic settings. So just kind of along that line of thinking, one thing I've been paying attention to is the monetization of different subreddits. So of course it's the financially savvy crypto bros who are the first folks to kind of go this direction, but last month the cryptocurrency subreddit monetized. So basically every regular period they have an issuance of tokens based off of the number of upvotes every post in that subreddit has gotten for that period. So if Bitcoin is something like a proof of energy expenditure, and that's how it reaches consensus, right? The subreddit is sort of proof of popular post submission, if that makes sense. And what's less interesting to me is like this what's more interesting to me is this mechanism like applied generally, right? Like this mechanism, can you build sort of a similar thing for like proof of quality research submission, right? Can you create kind of that honeypot, which, you know, takes a decentralized community and brings kind of all of this knowledge together, just by nature of the mechanism, you know, having some sort of issuance of tokens on a regular basis. You know, obviously this is a very new field, right? But in the 1 month that has happened since this subreddit monetized, it's reached a 30 million market cap. And I find that to be bizarre. You know, like this is memes, you know, this is people reposting news articles. It's not some sort of like highly valuable research community, right? So I'd be very interested to see, you know, how this use case could be explored, and what sorts of mechanisms can be approached that would bring a high value research community together and produce high value research.
Thanks for that. I actually didn't know that they had monetized, and that's really interesting. And again, I think that we have an opportunity as we reach the release of the Asterisk token eventually, right? So release the ability for people to become formalized members through the blockchain. What's our token economics? What economic model are we focusing on, and what does it all mean for the DAO? Is there any other opportunity for us to leverage the existing business models, or even create a new one in order to do something even further, even more innovative? I asked in the chat where you go for your first wave research, for that like first initial point of curiosity, and I'd love for you to answer because I'm going to save the chat. Jordan shared a thought, but could Asterisk take a incubator role to some extent? So, you know, incubating rogue science. And I mean, just basically from my understanding of what we're calling rogue science, technically, I mean, we can incubate anything as a DAO. So it would come down to due diligence built within our governance, and then the determination of the members involved. There are, just to like widen the field of what's possible within a DAO, there are DAOs that are buying land collectively in order to create it's a real estate DAO. So buying land so that the whole entire membership has ownership over that space, because property can be very expensive these days. So technically we can do whatever makes sense according to the original mission of the organization. So at this stage, I think is a really important area of inquiry, for sure. The value of the membership, interacting and supporting the fundies, is a big credibility builder. Yes, definitely. And the fact that, so one thing that we haven't really touched on that I think is an important unique factor of a DAO is that, again, the people who own a token within the organization thus have a stake within the organization. Not only do you have voting rights, but eventually, ideally, our work becomes renowned enough that the value of your token has increased. So if you do choose to leave at some point, you can sell, just as we discussed based on Connie's question, what if a large investor decides to leave? And perhaps it is shifting wealth just a little bit around the world for women. We are not a women-only DAO because we need voices from practitioners, and a lot of practitioners are men. So we're not forcing this organization to be focused or managed by a certain demographic of members. But there is an interesting side effect that probably we will have more women than men in this organization. And as a result, there could be some economic shift there. And that depends again on the structure that we choose to implement within the organization. So there's a lot of really interesting possibilities here. And because we're at the early stage, this is the moment where you could join and have your be part of the decision-making process. And Pat actually just shared a organization, a DAO that bought an eco village in Portugal. The one that I know about is taking action in the United States as well. So I think there's a few, interesting real estate DAOs available if you're suddenly piqued about what a DAO can do. There's a lot of other models. You don't have to be in DSAG, although I hope you'll stick with us. And thank you. So Katie has shared the membership form, the membership application as well. It's very simple. Don't be daunted, and you get to say how much time you actually have available. So you're not going to be forced to take another job with us. We're coming up to the top of the hour. So I'd like to just, take a moment to let anyone else speak if they've got something feeling eager to be released within them. And then we'll wrap up. Good questions. Somebody was asking if they don't have an ETH address, can you apply as a member? Yes, actually, we've had another member already apply. Your ETH address, your Ethereum address in the future, we ask for it so that eventually when we do issue tokens, if you have put in, Katie put it this way, if you put in sweat equity, basically. So if you've been to the meetings, if you've helped to steer the organization, we track that so that we can then literally return the value.
Veronica, this is so fascinating and so interesting. My next question is about, however, my next question is counterintuitive to, it seems like, what you're doing here. And so is there some kind of board of directors? When you and I spoke, you talked about a foundation. Will you be forming any kind of board of directors is one question. And then also, what will drive or who will drive whether or not something is brought to a vote in the larger DAO?
Thank you. That's a really good question. And you know, I've glanced off that topic a few times, but I haven't fully answered it. So I'm really glad you asked that question. So that is part of the governance structure that we need to determine. However, a lot of DAO organizations are functioning thusly. They have a group of core contributors, so members who act somewhat, as you stated, like a board of directors, but they have been so endowed by the organization, endowed by the DAO. And then we have the wider organization of membership. So we might have 10 to 20 core members that are making those decisions and taking action on behalf of the DAO with full visibility of all members. But as you stated, sometimes we need a few folks to actually take that activity on because we all can't be spending 40 hours a week inside of the organization. From there, though, of course, we have thousands of members who want to have a voting right and ownership within the organization, but they may not want to be so deeply embedded in the day-to-day or week-to-week activities. And so to me, I see the two different tiers of the people who are really involved in day-to-day or week-to-week activities, and then the rest of the organization that has full visibility of its activities, full voting rights, but that's as far as they want to be involved. So right now, if you complete the membership application, the biggest need is core contributors, people who want to meet with me on a weekly or bi-weekly basis. Again, we need to determine that as a group, what is necessary right now versus later where we might accelerate meetings. But if you fill out the membership application and you're interested in simply being a part of the organization in order to vote, that will come later. That will come in 6 months to a year, and then we will have the ability to contact you and invite you in. Thank you. Thank you, everyone, for being here and being a part of this. First of all, just thank you for your curiosity, especially if you aren't in Web3. You know, this can feel like a lot because we didn't just learn about what Asterisk can do. You also learn more about what blockchain technology, et cetera, is. So I am very thankful for you being here, and I'm very thankful for your interest in helping to shift the paradigm for women's health. As I said, coming from me, I can't understate the need, or can't overstate the need. It's so important. And so your interest on the membership form will be noted, and you will be contacted later this week in order to discuss the next meeting and starting to make the most important decisions to decide the whole direction of the organization, and we're going to take action first. I personally am really excited to see what we decide to go for first. And so yes, thank you just in general. You all are amazing people. Again, just as a reminder, if you would like to be connected with anyone here, please put your LinkedIn or any other contact information you prefer in the chat. Some folks have already done so. So if you have not perused the chat and seen those, do make sure you scroll through before you jump off. Otherwise, feel free to take yourself off mute to present final remarks or to say goodbye, and it will be a goodbye for now because I will certainly be reaching out to you. So thank you.